It's the Ask JP podcast with JP Morrell. Now, let's start the show. Here's JP.
Everyone, welcome to the Ask JP podcast. We tackle the questions and issues of the day. We are very excited to have our first candidate from District 91. Madison is here. She's going to answer some of our questions, give the public some more information. We know these races haven't gotten a lot of coverage, so this is kind of the opportunity to introduce people to them, get them to know you and what you're about and kind of what your position is on a lot of different topics. So we're going to go straight in. Monet, pass the mic to you.
All right. Welcome, Madison, to the Ask JP podcast. We're going to start with just some basic intro questions. I'm going to throw a couple at you because they kind of all tie in together. Why do you decide to run for the legislature? What makes you the best candidate? What are the needs of your constituency? Kind of, talk about those issues.
So I decided to run. I started a small business after Hurricane Ida and ended up talking to so many homeowners that were affected by the insurance crisis. And I mean, day in and day out, to talk to people who are not able to pay their mortgages or are losing their homes because of the cost of these premiums. We talk to a lot of renters every day as well who are being priced out of the city. And then talk to a lot of small business and people that have had a home for a generation and are now losing it, and they're losing home ownership. So at the end of the day, it came down to like the quality of life issues in the city. I always talk about growing up, and I think about my parents and what was important to them. My dad was a truck driver. And so there were three things that were like the most essential quality of life issues that they always talked about. And it was public education, whether or not we would have access to quality public education and an opportunity to go to college, health insurance. And if we had covered, if someone was sick, that a doctor's bill would not price us out, and the affordability there. And then the third thing was home ownership and whether or not they would have the ability to achieve home ownership. And so I see those three things as being compromised every day in New Orleans. I feel like I'm the most fit person for the job because of the homeowners insurance crisis. And I think once you talk to people every day that are dealing with this, we really need someone that can advocate and talk about this particular issue. No one else in there right now, again, has been talking to homeowners all day long. So I just see it day in and day out. And I see this as a huge issue facing the state and New Orleans.
Yeah, that's a great one. I'll switch to a slightly more interesting and less depressing one. Should marijuana be legalized for recreational use, and why or why not?
Okay. I mean, I definitely think yes. I think we're at the point where we see other states doing it well. I think there's so many other things we could be concerned about. We're talking about legalizing marijuana. We have the opioid epidemic that we have to focus on, and just the issues there that we're seeing across the state. I think all of that comes when you're thinking about marijuana and legalizing it.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And to think about all the millions on millions of tax dollars we're losing every year to a product that's available medicinally, and to be honest, people are using anyways.
And I also think at this point you can drive to go get it in another state.
Right.
And so I don't really see the whole barrier there.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Let's switch topics slightly. Sorry to go back to something more depressing. So it's very possible that in 2023 governor's race, we'll see the governor's office go to the Republican Party. If a Republican is elected governor, what is your plan as a Democratic lawmaker to pursue your policy goals?
So I think this goes without saying. It's like that we have to work on building coalitions within the Democratic Party. I think the first thing we do is think about how we elect more Democrats and have like a long-term plan in Louisiana. Because obviously we just had a Democratic governor, so this is not lost to us. We need to think about what could happen in 4 years and then what could happen in 8 years and what we need to be doing to chip away at this. We're dealing with a super majority, as we know. And I think it comes down to like really working across the aisle. I see insurance as, I know it's a boring issue sometimes to bring back to, but this is such a bipartisan thing. The river parishes are just as affected as New Orleans is. And you go across to other places, they're being priced out of their insurance. So I see that as something where Democrats can like really take the lead, pass legislation, really push that issue. And I think that's what it's going to take to kind of get things done.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Also staying on that tone of like New Orleans and interesting issues that affect both the state and the city, BGR recently released a report highlighting the need for the reorganization and reforms throughout Sewage and Water Board. Being that the Sewage and Water Board is this weird quasi-state entity, how do you see your role in addressing the inefficiencies throughout that organization?
Yes. So I was trying to do all the research about this. I'm like, how did this happen this way? And you would probably know more than I do. But it's been this way for so long because they did not want the city of New Orleans and our leadership here to have control over it because of the fear of, good government elsewhere. And so I think there's a long history with the Sewage and Water Board, being taken out of people that live here's hand, truthfully. But I see there as being steps that have just been taken the past few years to hopefully chip away at that again. Most recently, I know there was the overbilling, and the oversight. And so I think when we think about what we can do, it comes down to the quality of life issues again, and what affects people in the city. And so the water bills and the overbilling of water bills, I actually had one when I was in college, and we were renters. I had two roommates. So we had a $650 water bill. And I remember calling one of my parents in school, and I'm like, is this possible? What were we doing? And my dad's like, unless you have a pool out back, that's not possible. And so we had to go through the whole appeals process through the entity itself. And it was just the longest, most cumbersome process. Obviously, it's a burden on people. People are not able to pay these bills to begin with. So there was a bill that was brought. I know you had worked hard on it, and it was a great effort to kind of bring some oversight there and give the city council the ability to talk to residents and people that were affected and, give them an out. And so just things like that, and looking at what we can do to better quality of life for people and when people are affected by these things. So important.
Okay. Monet?
Absolutely. Okay. Let's talk about abortion. What is your stance on abortion? And please be specific as you would like.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So I always like to say, I'm like, my generation is going to be the first generation that will have fewer rights than my grandmother and our grandmothers had. So I don't even think people realize the gravity of that. And we always talk about rights and rights being taken away. I mean, truly in our lifetime, we have fewer rights than we did last year. And so, I mean, I worked in healthcare, and I got out of school and I started assisting in the emergency room. And it was right after we had Medicaid expansion in Louisiana. And so we ended up seeing so many patients that did not have established providers. And I just remember you see a lot of people that maybe had not seen a doctor regularly, or were in an emergency situation, or just didn't have somewhere to go. And now we're able to receive truly healthcare probably for the first time consistently. And I see this as just being the biggest theme when it comes to abortion access and care. It really comes down to healthcare. And Louisiana ranks very low overall. I don't know if we're 49th or 50th when it comes to overall health. And I see us only getting worse with this. We obviously have the worst maternal health in the whole developed world. And I think that contributes hand in hand to these laws. And so I'm very pro-choice. I think we need to start calling on our providers to get involved in this debate and really rely on healthcare systems, doctors, young people need to speak out against this because we saw a poll this morning that came out in the Advocate, and it was, is it 50% of people?
I believe it was 50%. Yes.
every time they reconfirm this, it's like, is it really? And then somebody does another poll and we're like, yes, it really is. Most people are pro-choice or believe that there needs to be some exceptions to these bans. So that's always encouraging.
Well, I think it's an interesting kind of angle, just kind of a follow-up that, like, you talk to so many doctors in this state who have such strong opinions on this, and yet they don't have the protection of the providers to voice their opinions. And I remember talking to a couple of OBs who were like, I want to go to the Capitol and I want to confront my legislators and say, you are hurting and killing women. And they are told by the providers that we have state contracts. If you do that and there's pushback, we're going to fire you.
Yeah.
And there's this always kind of weird issue with free speech where, like, you have conservatives with free speech who are like, don't limit my Twitter, don't limit my voice. And then you have the DeSantis kind of pushback of, wait. But if you talk about some stuff that makes me uncomfortable, I have the right to shut you up. And when I'm talking to these OBs, and they're like, especially the ones, so much of our healthcare is funded through the universities or through state systems with contracts. And in particular with LSU, they're literally being told, yeah, I mean, you can go up there and say something, but if Jeff Landry's governor, he's pretty much all about, regulating your free speech. And if you go up there and you attack his position on abortion, his position on no exemptions, and if he comes a knocking, you're going to get the door. And it's just, as legislators, it's so important to say that out loud and say, listen, when we're having these hearings and you come here and you talk, we're going to pay attention. And if you are retaliated against, I mean, I see Bob Mann on Twitter all the time. He's joking. He's like, when Jeff Landry's governor, they're firing my ass. They're going to find a way to fire me.
Yeah.
And when that's kind of like an open secret in the state that you cannot speak without someone step in to silence you and it being an okay expectation, it's so important for legislators to go, nah, we're not going to let that happen.
Yeah. No, we have to call on them, and I think we have to stand by them. And I think my biggest fear is that you have so many professionals and healthcare professionals that are leaving Louisiana because of this. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, we're just not going to have access to care in so many other fields. We don't even see or realize, I think, the gravity of this, because, I mean, you really jeopardize physicians being able to do their job and practice. So they can go elsewhere.
Well, and I mean, that's a great lead in. So one of our questions is, how would you describe the current status of gay rights in the state of Louisiana? And I say it's a good lead in because we literally had a pediatric cardiologist who is a gay man who said, me and my husband are out. And literally, this is a highly qualified doctor who saw that nationally and internationally, who loves this state, but said, because there's a possibility this could affect my ability to be with who I love and raise our children in a healthy environment, they literally left. So what is your take on the current status, and what are your thoughts on how we can regain some of the ground we've lost on gay and queer rights in the state of Louisiana?
This is such a depressing answer to bring us back, because I see rights and gay rights is probably being jeopardized more now than ever. I mean, obviously we had the hate slate come up. You saw, there was such a debate about these things, and they really came to the forefront. So I see that as just being so dangerous for Louisiana, the trajectory of the state. And again, I think the biggest thing, you're going to see professionals leaving. You're going to see people that are just going to make the choice to leave Louisiana, leave New Orleans, and go elsewhere. It's just disappointing that this is where we're at. And again, I think there's a greater call to action on behalf of Democrats in the state to really rally behind this, to engage with one another, to vote. And if you're angry by some of these things that are happening, every day we're reading in the news, the library, the bill is coming up about the library, the book banning, and it's so upsetting to see that. And it's that we need to remind people, we need to motivate people come election day to get to the polls and think about, the consequences. Because I see this as being a long-term
Mhm.
plan that we have to have together.
Yeah, and what was particularly frustrating about this previous session is it wasn't, those votes on queer issues didn't follow party lines. There were several blue seats that voted against healthcare for trans children and these don't say gay bills and dead name bills. It was extremely discouraging, and I watched a lot of the testimony, and there were people that said like they had a trans child and they would rather have essentially a dead grandchild at the gender that they were assigned at birth versus an alive and thriving grandchild that chooses their identity and embraces it. So it's so frustrating, and we need those strong voices, and 91 is the perfect place for a strong voice for our queer community.
And I mean, as a quick follow, the thing which I find very interesting to your point, Mass, regarding a long-term plan, the Democratic Party has raised less money statewide than in history. And I think to your point, a lot of that is you have really passionate Democrats and Democratic donors that when they see Democrats voting on the wrong side of those issues, they go, why in the hell would I give money to a party that will spend money to defend those seats? And the party itself really, I mean, call me an outlier, and Francis Thompson is like my great example of that. That has never been a Democrat. I've known Francis since I was a child. My dad served with him. He's always been a Republican. Yeah. Him switching parties, he had never given the Democratic Party a hard vote ever anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I would almost rather Democrats that are just going to vote like Republicans just be a Republican. Just if I get there's the certain people, and there are a couple of them they're with us 90% of the time, and there's like a 10% where there are a couple issues where they're not. But when you've got Democrats who are D's and then they're really R's, you run the risk of the North Carolina situation where you had that woman who was an R, ran as a D, and then when they needed the supermajority, flipped to an R, but she was always an R. We as a party have to do a much better job of, if you're a Republican, I know we're a big tent, but if you are truly a Republican, just say, hey guys, wrong door. You're looking for the door down the street with the R on it, because it devastates us internally as a party trying to attract candidates when people lose complete faith in the party as a whole actually being for democratic principles.
Yeah. And I think it's so interesting because, I mean, when you're talking about abortion or any of our issues, the opposing side shows up. They're calling these legislators. There's a very active base that is the alternative base. And they're telling them, you can't make this vote because look what's going to happen. We're going to run somebody against you. We are not going to be there for you. We kind of need to provide that same support and call on all of our partners, all of our people in New Orleans, all of our base, and be the backup when that happens. Like when there's a vote, we need to be there and say, no, we're going to come knock doors for you. You're going to get reelected. Take this vote. We're going to stand with you on this vote. And I think it's just, we're able now to have these like long-term plans for the party. And we need to recognize, like you're saying, who's there, who's going to stay there, who's going to stand with us, support them when they do. And when they don't, they can hit the road.
Right. Yeah.
So
Monet, I think it's your turn. It's hard for me to keep track. I'm just like,
no, it's okay. It is my turn, so it's okay. So if you were elected to this seat, what bills would you author for the 2024 regular session?
Yes. Okay. I have 3 things that always come to mind. It starts with and I'll go into it, but education always is primary. I think this is the biggest thing when we talk about early ed and job training and career and technical training. But during COVID, students lost essentially 2 years of school almost. And so you think about kids that were maybe on the verge of graduating and did not finish or could not finish school because they didn't have the resources, the classroom time, or maybe kids that needed the extra help there. we need to be thinking about them and where they are now. These are still adolescents. And if we're not reaching out to them to provide some type of career and job training, some type of bridge to get a diploma, there needs to be a special effort taken for pandemic kids that were affected. And I think at all age levels, that's important. So that comes up always. And then insurance reform. We had a special session, obviously, on insurance. We talked a whole lot and did a whole lot about insurance companies, which I know we need them here. But we also need to help people that are suffering from not being able to pay these premiums. And so we need to focus on legislation that can be directed at homeowners. Because if we help homeowners and they're able to pay their premiums, we will always get companies that come here. I mean, that just goes hand in hand. So there's a lot of legislation I think of when it comes to insurance, and it's like public reinsurance options, incentives for people that are, storm-proofing their homes. We're seeing some of that. Talking a lot about what we can do with insurance companies, with the state, and maybe inspecting them before they insure them to make sure that they can insure the property and insure the value of the property. And if they can't, then those homes will be on citizens. But we need to kind of weed out our system. So all insurance things, which I think there's a lot to do.
Yeah, I'm kind of as a Zoomer, I'm new to these insurance adult issues, but I'm kind of dipping my toe into the
these damn
real
Zoomers.
estate.
These Zoomers, get off my lawn. Get off my lawn.
No,
Zoomer.
but like I tried to get pre-approved for a loan, and when I found out how much the insurance is, I was so freaked out. I was like, oh,
such a barrier. It's such a barrier to people that are like, well, why would I invest here? And
it's like 2/3 of your monthly note. I mean, your monthly note. It's
where if you did that somewhere else, that would be a substantial amount of money you could take and invest elsewhere. So it's such a barrier to people living here. So I can't harp home enough on insurance.
Love it.
Yeah.
Last question, because we're keeping our tight 30. I want to give you time to do a closing, but what would you say to a recent college graduate who is questioning whether or not they should stay here? It's not even an abstract question anymore. It's literally like a crisis, because the brain drain in the state, it was bad to begin with, but in the last 2 to 3 years, the amount of college graduates who literally get their diploma, get in their car, and drive west, north, or east is pretty much instantaneous. So you're a younger person, you're seeking to go to the legislature. What would you tell them? What would you tell them to convince them to stay?
So I think about this, and you said you're a Zoomer, and I'm a Zoomer here. But as a recent graduate myself, I look around and everybody that I graduated with is no longer here. I can count, I graduated from Loyola. Most of friends, Tulane, Loyola, Xavier, UNO, they leave for a job elsewhere. And I look over at Texas, and like you said, everyone's leaving. I didn't feel like this was as big of a problem 5 or 6 years ago, even before the pandemic. There were so many people that were staying here. We had more tech companies. We had more startups. We have creative people. And I urge people to hold on and really get involved in the process here, because I think their votes, their involvement, their voice, when we come to the legislature and when we think about elections, is so valuable. And that could actually make the difference in their lives in the short term. You think about a sewage and water board bill, or you think about the immediate things that are coming up that are affordable housing things. Those can happen rather quickly if you think about it in the time frame. So I don't think it's this long-term drawn-out process all the time. I think their votes and their voice can make an immediate difference. And their involvement is so important. So I think people that are frustrated, we feel them, we need them, and we need them to get involved.
Okay. Well, that's pretty much it. I want to give you an opportunity to kind of give a final closing. Most people who watch this tend to be engaged voters anyway. it's a podcast about like voting stuff and issues.
time.
So you're not getting the casual person. You're usually getting the hardcore person who's a discerning voter. Kind of, I know that running for office is largely aspirational. People decide to run for office because you're like, I think I can do something different than what's been done. I can be better at it. But speak to those voters in District 91 and tell them once again, like, what your plan is, generally speaking, who you are as a person and why you're the best pick.
Yes. So I've been walking a lot of doors. This is my first time running, I'm sure. You've done that and it's been hot, but you talk to so many people and every day it gives you so much energy. So it's like I talk to people in District 91. A lot of the time they don't know who their current representative is. And my favorite question is always to ask, like, what is important to you right now as a voter? And there's like consistent things that are always coming up. The insurance is coming up, the public safety is coming up, the education is coming up, the opportunity is coming up. And they're just amazed in some ways that they have not met somebody that's there. And they are upset that people have not taken a stance on some of these things with public safety. And we don't have a voice there for public safety, or we don't have a voice there that's addressing the issue that they're talking about. So in summary, I see myself as the best person for the job because I'm willing to address some of these tough issues. And I definitely don't have the answers to everything, but I think my willingness to collaborate is the most important thing that we could use in the legislature in District 91. New Orleans has such important seats because they are Democratic seats, but they come with people and ideas, and we represent the city of New Orleans. So I think the gravity of this particular seat is so important to the state as a whole, but the city, and being able to really work with partners at all levels in the city. That's what we see is missing. And my willingness to do that definitely makes me the best candidate.
All right. Well, that's a pretty impressive closing.
Well,
that concludes this episode of Ask JP. We will have this up next week, so look for it. Monet will give you the heads up, and that's pretty much it. But thanks for being on. We really appreciate it. And for everyone else, look for the next episode. Thanks, guys.